Alright, guys, this is my first narration. Of course, I'm using a voice changer because I do not like my voice when I hear it for recordings. We're going to see how this works. Our first story tonight is Don't Fight Over That Last Thanksgiving Turkey at the Grocery Store. It's Not Worth Your Family's Life by Weird Bryce Guy. I had to sit there and watch my grandmother peel back the skin on her own hand. That's what traumatized me. Dip it, raw flesh, exposed, into a bowl of hot gravy and take a bite. Her teeth couldn't break for her fingers. Her jaw was too weak. She sat there, munching uselessly, while gravy and blood dripped down her chin. She was helpless, unable to stop herself, unable to finish her meal, stuck in the abhorrent action like some broken robot. The demonic spirit's malediction had paralyzed us all, and my poor grandma, 74 years old, was the first to be forced to perform an unimaginable act of self-mutilation. Her bodily anatomy was taken in an instant from her, unceremoniously revoked by the same incontestable power that had telekinetically brutalized my parents and then joined their bodies together into an unholy union of battered flesh. My grandfather, sitting across from me and next to his wife, watched her with tears in his eyes, and then at a snap of our tormentor's fingers, he turned, placed his own hand on his plate, and gripped the knife with his own hand. I involuntarily cried out, "No!" Not wanting to see him perilously drive into self-harm. He looked up at me, an expression of utter horror on his face, and I sobbed openly, loudly. "I told you, if you make a sound, you'll be forced to skip your meal and go straight to dessert. No meat for you." The thing with two horrendously fused hands, the thing that had once been my mother and father, separately hobbled towards me, knocking dishes and glasses from the table. It bumped into a chair that had been pulled out from beneath the table hours ago. My brother's chair. It smashed it with a nodule-ridden tentacle. The fragments of wood went flying, unavoidable shrapnel that stuck into my skin. I only dimly felt the pain. The paralytic element, whatever it was, had also carried a numbing effect. The lurching horror that came to stand awkwardly beside me pressed right up against my shoulder, and I felt its body throbbed and pulsate spasmodically, heard its conjoined hearts beat arrhythmically, smelled the offal of its gruesomely exposed, haphazardly entangled digestive systems. Blood and bile dripped from its tattered clothing. "Are you ready for dessert? You've earned it, with that little outburst of yours." Reaching into the cavity between my mother's deflated breast and my father's shredded pectoral, it pulled out a clump of slime, like some awful, bowel-like excretion. It admired the green stuff for a few moments, my mother's eyes twinkling in the light of the blizzardly lustrous gloop, as it raised her hand above me. Then, with a film-filled crackle, it dropped a handful of slime onto my plate and forcefully slammed my face onto it. The smell and the small taste of it I got were both awful, but the worst part was the sensation. The slime on my face, it burned, not necessarily in terms of temperature, but acidity. It was painfully caustic. Ah! As I struggled to breathe, I felt it start to eat away at the skin of my cheeks. Thankfully, I didn't distinctively close my eyes upon landing. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have gone blind. Just when I thought I was going to die, drowned in a shallow pool of corrosive slime, the pressure on my back of my head was relieved, and I bolted upright, gasping for air. Instinctively, I shook my face, desperately needing to get the slime off of me. I only stopped whipping my face back and forth when I heard my grandmother scream in agony. Ah! Turning, I expected to find her munching on her hand, thinking that she'd finally bitten through her fingers. I instead found her face melting, the muscle already given away to bone as the acid worked its way through her old, easily corroded skin. It only took a few seconds for her to die. My grandfather stared, rendered speechless at what just happened. I lost control, became hysterical. I cried, begged for her to wake up, to look at me, even as her melted eyeballs started to drip from the smoldering socket. The thing walked away, sauntered to the back to the head of the table, where it sat down and pantomimed eating. There was nothing on the plate before it. It picked up a fork with my mom's hand, a knife with both of my father's. They were too weak to individually be of any use, and sliced it and stabbed at the imaginary meal. Dinner went on like that for at least another hour, me alternating between periods of deep hysteria and incessant quietness. My grandfather staring, the thing cutting away endless portions from its empty plate. When the doorbell rang, it stood, clapped both of its hands together, and said, "Oh, that must be your brother. I'll bring him in." That brought me back to awareness, back to the maddening reality. My brother had just had his first child, and when his fiancée were so happy to start a family together, I knew that I couldn't let this thing harm him. I couldn't let my brother be taken away from his soon-to-be wife and beautiful baby. Somehow, I overcame the spell of toxin or paralysis, probably owed to the admixture of built-up adrenaline and desperation. I stood, ran around the table, and with the knife I had apparently grabbed along the way, seized hold of my father and stabbed him in his head. The blade sank into his skull easily, way too easily, and the greenish yellow pus surged out of instead of his blood. The horde turned around, and my mother's face smiled wickedly. "Dad's only been dead for hours. Couldn't you tell?" I was sent flying across the dining room, into the cabinets where the fancy plates, many now smashed into bits, and kept outside of the holidays. The impact knocked the breath out of me, and I landed on the floor hard in dizziness of pain. Shard of glass, the panes from doors fell onto me, and I nearly had my jugular sliced by a particularly large fragment. Cowering on the floor, with my hands belatedly covering my neck and face, I listened to the sound of the horde's ungainly footsteps as it went to the front door. I heard the door open, and my brother's scream filled the house. Wah! Ignoring the shards of glass, I crawled through the hall that led to the front of the house. I heard sounds of struggling. Then my brother screamed again. Ah! Only this time it was much weaker, intoned with immense pain, and strangely muffled. This hastened my movement a little, although my ribs and shoulder ached unbearably, something undoubtedly bruised or even broken. Rounding the corner, I came into the hall. It saw a sight of unprecedented obscenity. The parental horror was consuming my brother at first. My brother's legs dangled from the creature's gaping chest cavity, the feet kicking helplessly, sending flecks of blood splattering against the walls of the halls. The recently vacuumed carpet and a pristinely polished table whereon sat my mother's prematurely placed nativity scene. His heart rending scream was abruptly, tragically cut off with a loud crunch as the jaws of the horse's chest cavity, the warped, lethally curved ribcage, shut tightly upon his own, instantly killing him. The bisected lower half of his body fell to the floor with a wet thud, struck and dumb by the sheer grisliness of his death. I could only watch as his upper half was chewed and swallowed by the massive jaws. But the horrific scene didn't end there. I was then forced to behold the digestion of my brother's remains for his exposed innards, petrified. I watched the thing's intestines and stomach swell as the masticated and acid liquefied remains coursed through the repulsively immaculated viscera of my mother and father. Finally, again, mustering up some remnant of willpower, I closed my eyes and turned away. Refused to watch the last few unwholesome moments of the impossibly fast process. The event that happened in a dreamlike daze, and now I considered it a mercy that I was spared from my horror-induced delirium, the murder of my father and grandmother. If he screamed or called out for help, I didn't hear. Slumped against the hall table, lying on my arms, I waited for death to come to me, perceived only by the dimness awareness the ending of my grandfather's life. Heard the seemingly far off and inexpressibly wicked howling and cackling of that body stealing and flesh eating demon. After what could have been minutes or hours, the thing returned to the hall, and I was lifted up by my neck. Effortlessly, it held me up to so that my face was leveled with my dead father's, and speaking through the dropping lips in a depraved display of puppetry, it said, "One must remain to bear the guilt of what his family has done. You've robbed me of my Thanksgiving, and so I robbed you of yours. Live and never forget what happened here." And even though I was looking into my father's glazed, unseeing eyes, I saw behind him a familiar presence, an image of someone I'd recently met, impelled to search further, appeared deeply into the dead eyes, and saw him. Earlier in the day, my mom and I were at the grocery store, where we encountered the man in the strange, old-timey clothing, with a thick, unsightly beard and hard black eyes. The man who cursed us. Originally, I hadn't planned on visiting, but my dad, after a long phone conversation, during which I was bribed with homemade cheesecake, convinced me to attend. He'd already done the same for my brother, who also hadn't planned on visiting. So with 3 more mouths to feed, my brother's baby left with his fiance's parents, my mother decided to buy a bigger turkey, donating the one she already bought to charity. This morning, she and I went to the grocery store and managed to snag the last turkey they had, a huge bird, which they brought out from the back, where it had somehow remained unnoticed for days. It was a lucky find for us. Lucky, in a moment, at least. The strangely clothed man, who had also gone for a last-minute turkey run, offered us money for the turkey, but we declined and explained our impromptu need for it. He became enraged, said some unrepeatedly, eerily lyrical things, then stormed off. We had just assumed he was crazy, a certain trick by my mom's word, and went on along with our day. Suffocating under the grip of my mom's monstrously proportioned hand, I tried to apologize. I'm sorry, man. Though I hadn't done anything ethically wrong, but the deranged man who had somehow tracked us down and laid a curse upon us wouldn't listen. Just when I thought I'd choked to death, the second time that night, it reared back and slammed me against a hall table, smashing the little figurines and left me to lie among the pieces. Before I passed out from the shock and pain, I saw the whole wretched body go still, and then fall apart in a sudden landslide of flesh and organs. And as it self-destructed, it let out a long, insane, blackly unforgettable howl. That was last Thanksgiving. I was obviously the only survivor. I recovered from my injuries, but haven't recovered from my psychological trauma. but it's a new year, a new Thanksgiving, and I'm spending it with my brother's child and their grandparents. The only family I have left. I have a few last minute items to grab from the grocery store, and everything more will be ready. What could go wrong? Hi, this is my first story. I thank you for the guy I giving credit tonight, of course, by the guy Bryce. And this was a good story. I liked it. This was my very cool first story that I've ever done. I have written a few stories before, but those were pretty cringe. And I felt like, you know what? Why not do a new one? Anyways, if you like to read this story, I'll leave a link in the description below. Also, leave a link to my other channels. I do gaming and also like VR gaming mostly, both of them, but they're separate games. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed tonight's story.